How I went from nothing to millions, 5 principles anyone can follow. So let me tell you about a guy named Marcus. Marcus is 19 years old. He works the morning shift at a coffee shop not far from where I live, one of those small independent places I love because the Wi-Fi is fast and nobody judges you for sitting there 3 hours with one oat milk latte. Marcus is sharp. You can see it in his eyes. He's the kind of guy who reads between customers, who asks real questions, not just polite ones. One morning I watched a man in an expensive suit, I'll call him Mr. Grumpy, because that's exactly who he was, walk up to Marcus at the counter. Marcus had asked him, very politely, for any advice on how to get ahead in life. And Mr. Grumpy, without even putting down his phone, said something like, "Your generation doesn't want to work. Everything handed to you. You kids are soft." Marcus tried to push back. He said he was working 2 jobs, saving for school, had a plan. Mr. Grumpy cut him off mid-sentence. "Excuses," he said. "That's all I hear from young people. Excuses. Now, I grew up in a 2-bedroom flat with my mum, my grandmother, and my little sister. My mum worked nights at a care home. We didn't go on holidays. I wore the same trainers for 2 school years. I made my first million at 26. So when I saw Marcus standing there, taking that lecture from a man who had clearly never gone hungry, I couldn't sit still. I walked over. I looked at Mr. Grumpy and I said something along the lines of, "The world Marcus is entering is genuinely different from the one you and I came up in. Tougher in some ways, full of more opportunity in others. He's not making excuses, he's working 2 jobs and still thinking about his future. That's not soft. That's exactly what success looks like at 19. What he needs from people like us is direction, not a lecture." Mr. Grumpy stared at me for a second, then walked off with his coffee. I'm not sure a single word landed. Some people's minds are locked. But later, during Marcus's break, I sat with him for about an hour. And I shared the 5 things that changed my life. Today I'm going to share all of them with you, and I'm going to go deeper than I did that morning in the coffee shop, because what I gave Marcus was a sketch. What you're getting today is the full picture. So get comfortable. This is going to be a long one. But if you stay until the end, I promise you will leave here with a completely different understanding of how money actually works, and more importantly, how you can make it work for you. Let's go. Principle 1, sharpen the axe before you try to cut the tree. Here's something nobody told me when I was young, and I think it's the single biggest reason most people stay broke even when they're trying really hard to get rich. They skip the sharpening. Think about it this way. Imagine you're in a forest and you need to cut down a massive oak tree. You've got an axe. You're motivated. You start swinging. But the blade is dull. You'll be hacking at that tree all day, exhausted, frustrated, barely making a dent. Now imagine you spent an hour first, sharpening that blade to a razor edge. Suddenly, a few powerful swings and the tree is down. That's exactly what most people skip when they decide they want to get rich. They just start swinging. They launch a business they heard about on YouTube. They try to flip products. They join someone's dropshipping course. They're swinging like crazy, and they wonder why nothing is falling. The blade is still dull. So what does it mean to sharpen the axe? It means building what I call high-income skills. Skills that the market pays generously for. Skills that, once you have them, mean you can generate serious money almost anywhere. And I want to be very specific here, because learn a skill is advice so vague it's almost useless. When I talk about high-income skills, I mean skills that can realistically get you to $10,000, or pounds, per month. Skills where the demand is high and the supply of truly excellent people is low. Right now, in 2024, the skills I'm most excited about are video editing and content production. The demand for video content has exploded. Brands, entrepreneurs, YouTubers, coaches, everyone needs video. A genuinely good editor who understands pacing, storytelling, and audience retention can easily charge $3,000 to $5,000 per client per month. Copywriting. The ability to write words that make people take action. Sales pages. Email sequences. Ad copy. This is one of the most underrated skills in the world. I know copywriters in their 20s pulling in $20,000 to $30,000 a month working from a laptop. Sales, specifically high-ticket closing. If you can get on the phone with a prospect and consistently close deals worth $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, you will never, ever be broke. Commission on those deals is extraordinary. Software development and AI integration. I don't just mean knowing how to code, though that's still incredibly valuable. I mean understanding how to build and integrate AI tools into businesses. This is the frontier right now. Performance marketing. Running paid ads on Facebook, Google, TikTok, and actually being able to show a client that for every pound or dollar they put in, they're getting 3 back. That skill is worth a fortune. Here's why these skills matter beyond just the money they make you directly. My nephew Daniel, he's 22 now, started learning video production when he was 17. He was obsessed. He'd film everything. He built a portfolio on YouTube before he even had real clients. By the time he was 19 he was making £8,000 a month doing videos for fitness brands and online coaches. But here's the part that changed his life more than the money: the clients he was working with were incredibly successful entrepreneurs. He was in their world. He was on their calls. He heard how they thought about business, about risk, about money. He got access to a room most people spend years trying to get into, and he got paid to be there. That's what a high-income skill does. It opens doors. The money is almost secondary. Now, a word of warning, and this is important. Sharpening the axe takes time. Real time. Not 2 weeks. Not a 90-day challenge. I'm talking about consistent, focused work over 12 to 24 months before you're genuinely at the level where the big money starts flowing. The people who fail are the ones who switch every 3 months. They do video editing for a bit, then they hear about copywriting, then they pivot to coding, then they're back to video. Nothing ever gets sharp. They're just collecting blunt axes. Pick one. Go deep. Become one of the best 20% in the world at it. That's where the money is. Let me give you one more example from my own life, because I think it makes this concrete in a way that a list of skills can't. When I was 20, I got a part-time job doing basic admin for a small marketing agency. Answering emails, booking meetings, filing documents. Completely unglamorous. But I watched the copywriters at that agency like a hawk. I sat near them during lunch. I asked questions. I stayed late and offered to help with anything. After about 4 months, one of the senior copywriters, a woman named Sandra who had been in the industry for 15 years, let me try drafting a small section of a direct mail campaign. Just 2 paragraphs. She ripped it apart, showed me why every sentence was wrong, and explained how to fix it. That was the most valuable 45 minutes of my professional life up to that point. I spent the next year obsessing over copywriting. I read every book. I handwrote classic ad copy by hand, a technique the best copywriters use to train their instincts. I wrote free samples for small businesses just to get feedback. By the time I was 22, I was charging real money for copy. By 24, I was generating more from copywriting alone than I had ever made in a full-time job. And the skills I built during that period, understanding human psychology, persuasion, what motivates people to make decisions, those skills have been worth millions to me in every business I've built since. That's the thing about a genuinely sharp skill. It compounds. It doesn't just make you money in one lane, it makes everything you touch more powerful. And I want to leave you with this thought before we move on: if you genuinely sharpen your skill to that level, you will never fear losing money again. Because you know, with absolute certainty, that you can always make more. The skill is the security, not the savings account. Principle 2, lock your money away from yourself. Okay. You've sharpened the axe. The money starts coming in. Maybe it's 2,000 a month. Maybe it's 5. Maybe, eventually, it's 20. Now what? Here's what most people do, they spend it. They upgrade their lifestyle. Nicer flat, nicer clothes, a car that costs more than their dad made in a year. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying your money, to a point. But if spending is happening faster than investing, you're running on a treadmill. No matter how fast you go, you stay in the same place. I want to tell you about a mistake I nearly made. When I started making real money, I was about 23, the temptation to spend was overwhelming. I remember looking at watches. I remember test driving a car that cost £60,000. I remember genuinely considering renting a flat in a part of London I absolutely could not afford yet. What stopped me was a conversation I had with a man I'd met through work. Older guy, self-made, very quiet about his wealth. He said to me, "The first $1 million is easy. Any idiot with the right opportunity can make $1 million. The real test is what happens next. Can you hold it? Can you grow it? Most people fail that test." That hit me hard. So here's what I did. And what I still do. I decided, almost like a rule, that a fixed percentage of everything I earned would be invested immediately, before I could think about it, before I could convince myself I needed something. Not a fixed amount. A percentage. Because as income grows, the investment grows with it automatically. I started at 15%. Today it's significantly higher. But the principle is the same, pay your future self first. Now, where do you invest? I want to give you some real answers here, not vague motivational nonsense. Option 1, Index funds. This is where I put the majority of my long-term investment money. Specifically, I've invested heavily in S&P 500 index funds over the years. If you'd put £100 a month into an S&P 500 index fund starting in 2004, by 2024 you'd have somewhere around £50,000, from just £100 a month. The last decade alone, the S&P 500 has averaged just under 11% annual returns. The magic word here is compounding. Albert Einstein reportedly called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world, and whether he actually said it or not, the sentiment is correct. Money grows on top of itself. The longer you leave it, the more violent the growth becomes. Option 2, property. I own several properties. They generate rental income, passive money that arrives every month whether I'm working or not. Property also appreciates over time, meaning the asset itself becomes more valuable. It's not perfect, it requires capital, management, and patience, but over a long timeline it's one of the most reliable wealth-building tools that exists. Option 3, a business. Not someone else's business through shares, your own. The returns on a successful business are potentially limitless. I've seen people build businesses from nothing to 7 figures in 3 years. But this requires the skill we talked about in Principle 1, plus a level of risk tolerance we'll talk about later. Here's my current situation, because I think transparency is important. I made a commitment in my late 20s that I would never sell my long-term investments. I treat that money as untouchable. The compounding on those early investments now generates me, on average, around $14,000 to $18,000 per week in passive returns. I don't need to touch the principal. I live from the growth. That's the goal. Not just to make money, but to reach the point where money makes money while you sleep. One more thing, and this is slightly psychological but very real. When I locked my money away and started treating it as gone, as already invested, already committed, something interesting happened mentally. I felt broke again. I was earning well, but I was living lean. And that hunger drove me harder than I'd ever worked before. There's something about scarcity that sharpens your focus. The boxer training in the beaten-up gym, with the leaky roof and the broken equipment, he's often hungrier than the one with the state-of-the-art facility. That lean, hungry feeling can be one of your greatest assets. So here's the challenge: decide today what percentage of every pound or dollar you earn will be invested. Write it down. Make it automatic. Set it up so the money moves without you having to decide. Because the version of you who just got paid will always find a reason to spend it. Let me also talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough: lifestyle inflation. Because this is the silent killer of people who actually do start making money. Lifestyle inflation is what happens when every raise, every new client, every good month, is immediately absorbed by a higher standard of living. Better car. Better flat. More expensive restaurants. Designer clothes. It feels like progress because your life looks better. But if your investments aren't growing at the same rate as your spending, you are actually going backwards. I've watched people earn six figures and still be broke. Not because they were stupid. Because every time they leveled up their income, they leveled up their lifestyle by the same amount, or more. They were always one bad month away from disaster because they had nothing saved, nothing invested, no cushion. The number I always come back to is this: you should not feel your income in your lifestyle until your investments are genuinely growing. Meaning, if you get a big raise or a windfall, the majority of that goes into assets. Not into your wardrobe. Not into a holiday. Into assets. I'm not saying live like a monk forever. I'm saying delay gratification strategically. For a few years. Specifically during the period when compounding has the most power, which is right now, when you're young and time is on your side. Think about it this way. If you invest £500 a month starting at 22, versus starting at 32, the difference in your pot at 65 is not double. It's not even triple. At an average return of 10%, starting at 22 gives you roughly 3 million by retirement. Starting at 32 gives you around 1.1 million. Same monthly contribution. 10 extra years of compounding is worth nearly £2 million. That number should make you want to automate an investment right now and never touch it. Principle 3, stop fearing failure and start fearing regret. I want to ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this question. What are you actually afraid of? If you say failure, I'd push back on that. Because in my experience, most people who say they're afraid of failure are not really afraid of the failure itself. They're afraid of what other people will think if they fail. They're afraid of being the person who tried and didn't make it. They're afraid of the conversation at Christmas dinner. They're afraid of the raised eyebrow from a mate who told them it wouldn't work. That fear, social fear, the fear of judgment, is the single biggest killer of potential I have ever seen. Let me tell you what fear cost me. At 21, I was working at a logistics company. My manager was, to be completely honest, one of the most demoralizing people I've ever met. He micromanaged everything. He made me feel small on a daily basis. And I had an idea, a business idea, something in digital marketing, that I wanted to pursue. But I was terrified. I had no savings cushion at the time. What if I failed? What would people say? My mum had worked so hard, what if I threw everything away on a stupid idea? I stayed at that job for another 8 months. 8 months of being made to feel worthless every day. 8 months of not pursuing something I genuinely believed in. And then one day, I just decided. Enough. I handed in my notice. My manager laughed. He literally laughed and said, "Good luck with that." Leaving that job was the single best financial decision I have ever made. Within 18 months I had replaced my salary 5 times over. Within 3 years I had built something I genuinely could not have imagined while I was sitting in that gray office. The regret I feel, and I do feel it, is not for leaving. The regret is for waiting 8 months too long. Here's what I need you to understand: you have a superpower right now that you will never have again to the same degree. And that superpower is time. If you're 22 and you try something and it falls apart, so what? You rebuild. You're 22. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain. If you're 28 and you try something and it falls apart, so what? You start over. You have whatever you've learned from the failure, which is actually worth a lot. The people I know who are truly wealthy almost all have a story involving a spectacular failure somewhere along the way. A business that collapsed. An investment that went to zero. A partnership that blew up. These aren't footnotes to their success stories, they're often the chapter that made the success possible. Failure teaches you what no course, no book, no YouTube video can. It teaches you what doesn't work, specifically and personally, for you. And if you approach it the right way, with curiosity instead of shame, it sharpens you for the next attempt. Now, I'm not saying be reckless. I'm saying take calculated risks. There's a difference. A calculated risk is, I've researched this market, I understand the downside, I know what failure looks like and I can recover from it. I've tested the idea on a small scale. The evidence suggests this is worth trying. Recklessness is, I heard about this on a podcast, sounds exciting, I'm going all in tomorrow. One of those will build you. The other might break you. But here's the thing, even a bad calculated risk is better than perfect inaction. Because at least you'll learn something. Paralysis teaches you nothing. And as you get older, this window where you can afford to swing and miss, gets smaller. Mortgage. Kids. Parents who need support. The responsibilities accumulate and the safety net of time gets thinner. So if you're young and you're watching this and you have an idea that you've been sitting on for 6 months or a year because you're waiting for the right time, I need you to hear this. The right time is now. Not because everything is perfect. But because you will never have more runway than you have at this exact moment. Here's one more thing I want to add to this principle, because it's something I wish someone had told me at 20. You don't have to go all in on day one. One of the biggest myths about entrepreneurship and building wealth is that you have to make this dramatic leap, quit everything, burn the boats, go all in or don't bother. That's nonsense. That's a story people tell after they've already succeeded, because it sounds heroic in retrospect. The reality is that most successful ventures start as side projects. You test the idea while you still have income. You validate that people will actually pay for what you're offering before you make it your whole life. You build a small version, get feedback, iterate. And then, when the evidence is strong enough, you scale up your commitment. This approach massively reduces risk without reducing ambition. You're still going after it. You're still building. But you're not betting your rent money on an untested hypothesis. I started my digital marketing work on the side. My first 3 clients came through word of mouth while I was still employed. By the time I handed in my notice, I already had a pipeline. I wasn't jumping into the unknown, I was stepping into something I'd already partially built. That's smart risk, not recklessness. So if you're sitting on an idea, here's what I want you to do. Don't quit your job tomorrow. Instead, commit to spending 10 hours a week, just 10 hours, testing the idea. Build the smallest possible version of it. Find 5 potential customers and try to sell it to them. If you can't sell it to 5 people, you don't have a business yet. If you can, you've just taken the most important step. Principle 4, never stop being a student. Have you heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect? It's a psychological concept that describes something fascinating about how human confidence and knowledge interact. When people first start learning about something, their confidence goes through the roof almost immediately. They know a little, and they feel like they know a lot. This is called the peak of Mount Stupid, which is a genuinely wonderful name for it. Then, as they learn more, they realize how much they don't know. Confidence crashes. This is the valley of despair. And then, for the people who keep going, confidence slowly rebuilds as genuine knowledge accumulates. This is called the slope of enlightenment. And the people who reach that plateau are the ones who become truly dangerous in any field. Most people never get off Mount Stupid. They stay there because they confuse early confidence for mastery. They stop learning. And the world moves on without them. I'll give you a very personal example. In 2018, I knew essentially nothing about cryptocurrency. I had heard of Bitcoin, vaguely. I dismissed it as a fad. But then I started genuinely learning, reading white papers, watching technical breakdowns, talking to people who understood the technology. By early 2019 I had done enough homework to feel confident putting a meaningful portion of my portfolio into crypto assets. The return on that investment over the following years was extraordinary, the kind of number I won't quote because I don't want this to sound like I'm bragging, but trust me, it was life-changing money. That win was only possible because I kept learning. Because I was still curious. Because I didn't think I already knew everything I needed to know. Compare that to people who had the same information available to them in 2018 and 2019, and ignored it. Not because they weren't smart. But because they'd stopped being students. Here's the brutal truth about the modern economy, the half-life of knowledge is shrinking rapidly. What was a cutting-edge skill 5 years ago might be automated today. Industries that seemed rock-solid are being disrupted constantly. The only way to stay ahead is to keep updating your mental software. I watch YouTube. I read newsletters from people who are smarter than me in specific areas. I listen to podcasts on long drives. I force myself to have conversations with people who challenge my assumptions, not people who just agree with me. I have a standing reading habit, minimum 30 minutes every morning before I look at my phone. And this isn't just about finance and business. I try to understand technology, psychology, history, geopolitics, because all of these things connect. Understanding why a war in one part of the world affects commodity prices, which affects inflation, which affects interest rates, which affects property values, that kind of systems thinking only develops if you're constantly learning across disciplines. Here's what I tell everyone I mentor: find the people who are 10 years ahead of you. Not just financially, in terms of knowledge and thinking. Study them obsessively. Not to copy them, but to understand how they see the world. Because their perspective today is your opportunity tomorrow. One practical thing you can do this week: find one person in your field who is significantly more successful than you, and reach out to them. Ask one specific, thoughtful question. Not, "Can you be my mentor?" That's too much to ask of a stranger. Just one good question that shows you've done your homework. You'd be surprised how many successful people respond to genuine curiosity. Another thing, be ruthless about what you put in your head. Watching 3 hours of mindless content every evening is not rest, it's decay. Your brain is being shaped by what you feed it. If you feed it nothing but entertainment, it will optimize for entertainment. If you feed it ideas, problems, stories of success and failure, it will sharpen for that instead. I'm not saying don't relax. I'm saying choose your inputs with the same care you choose your investments. Because in a very real sense, they are investments. Let me give you a concrete example of what continuous learning has been worth to me in the last few years alone. In 2020, when most of the world was in lockdown and a lot of people were panicking about markets, I was reading, obsessively, about what historically happens to markets after major economic shocks. I read about the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. I read about the recovery after the dot-com crash. I studied the patterns. And the pattern was clear: when the world looks its most uncertain, the stock market is often setting up for an extraordinary run. Not always. Not guaranteed. But historically, the people who kept investing through chaos, and even increased their investments, were the ones who came out dramatically ahead. So that's what I did. I increased my monthly investment amount in 2020. I bought more when prices were lower. And the years that followed rewarded that decision more than almost anything else I've done. That knowledge didn't come from a school. It came from 10 years of continuous learning about how markets behave, why they behave that way, and what the historical record actually shows. This is why I say, school teaches you to pass exams. Self-education teaches you to build wealth. I'm not dismissing formal education. A degree in medicine or law or engineering can be the foundation of an extraordinary career. But for the majority of people watching this, the skills that will actually build your financial life, investing, business, marketing, sales, negotiation, are not taught in school. They're learned by doing, by reading, by finding mentors, and by never letting yourself get comfortable in what you already know. One last thing on this principle. Find a mentor. Not a YouTube mentor, an actual human being who has done what you want to do, who you can ask real questions and get real answers from. This might feel impossible if you're starting from zero. But it's more achievable than you think. Most successful people got to where they are because someone helped them. They remember what that felt like. And many of them are genuinely willing to pay it forward, if you approach them the right way, with the right energy, with something to offer, and with genuine respect for their time. Be the person worth mentoring. Show up consistently. Do what you say you'll do. Ask good questions. And don't ask for too much too soon. Build the relationship slowly. The returns on a great mentorship are incalculable. Principle 5, your circle is your ceiling. Last one. And in some ways I think this is the most important, and the hardest. I want to start with a study. In 2024, researchers published findings showing that one of the most reliable predictors of whether a person accumulates wealth is not their education, not their starting income, not even their IQ. It's the economic makeup of their social circle. Specifically, for every 10% increase in the proportion of wealthy friends you have, your likelihood of investing in the stock market increases by around 3%, and your likelihood of saving regularly increases by around 5%. Why? Because behavior is contagious. When everyone around you is spending, buying rounds, upgrading their phones, booking holidays on credit, that's the normal. That's what people do. The idea of investing feels weird and nerdy and slightly antisocial. But when you're around people who invest, who talk about assets, who are genuinely building wealth, suddenly that becomes normal. You start asking questions. You start doing what they're doing. Not because you were told to. Because it's just what people around you do. I want to be careful here because this can sound cold. And it isn't meant to be. I'm not saying abandon your oldest friends. I'm not saying only spend time with people for what they can do for you financially. Genuine friendship is one of the most valuable things in life, and measuring it in financial terms is a fast route to loneliness. What I am saying is, be intentional about adding new people to your life. Seek out environments where the conversations are different, where people talk about building things, about ideas, about opportunity. When I was in my early 20s, I found a business networking event that met once a week in a pub near the city. I was the youngest person there by about 15 years. Everyone else seemed to have their life together in ways I could barely understand. I was intimidated as hell. But I kept showing up. And over time, those people started treating me as a peer. I learned things in those conversations that no course or book had ever taught me. I made connections that directly led to my first major business deal, and I started to believe, really believe, that the level those people were at was achievable for me. That last part is the most underrated benefit of changing your environment. It changes what you think is possible. When you grow up around poverty, wealth feels abstract. It's something that happens to other people, on TV, in another world. But when you spend time around people who have built real wealth from nothing, people whose backgrounds are no different from yours, that abstraction disappears. It becomes concrete. It becomes something you can reach out and touch. Some practical ways to change your circle: join communities built around specific skills or industries. Online and offline. The quality of your network is directly related to the specificity of your community. A generic entrepreneurs Facebook group is not the same as a focused community of people building SaaS businesses, or a mastermind for e-commerce founders, or a forum for real estate investors in your city. Attend events where serious people spend time. Conferences, workshops, seminars, even ones that cost a bit to attend. The price of entry is often what filters out the people who aren't serious. The room gets better when there's a barrier. Be genuinely useful to people ahead of you. The fastest way to get someone's attention and respect is not to ask for their help, it's to give them something valuable first. Introduce them to someone they should know. Share an insight that's relevant to their business. Do something useful without expecting anything in return. That's how real relationships get built. And be patient. Building a network of genuinely high-quality, high-caliber people takes years. It's not a hack. It's a long game. But the compound interest on relationships is just as powerful as the compound interest on money. Final words. I've been in that coffee shop many times since that morning with Marcus, and I'm happy to tell you that he's doing well. We stay in touch. He's been developing his skills, he's getting into content creation, building a small portfolio, starting to think seriously about what he wants his financial life to look like in 5 years. He's on the right path. But what I keep thinking about is the millions of people like Marcus who never get that conversation. Who get the Mr. Grumpy version instead, the lecture, the dismissal, the message that they're not good enough or not trying hard enough, and who internalize it. If that's been your experience, I want to say this directly, they were wrong about you. The world you're entering is complicated. The old rules don't fully apply anymore. The straight path from education to job to house to retirement has been disrupted by technology, inflation, a changing labor market, and 100 other forces that aren't your fault. You're not lazy because you're struggling. You're navigating something genuinely hard. But here's what's also true, the opportunities available to someone with a laptop and an internet connection today are more extraordinary than anything that existed when I was starting out. You can learn faster, reach more people, build things at a fraction of the cost, and connect with mentors and communities that would have been impossible to access 20 years ago. The 5 principles I've shared with you today are not magic. They won't make you rich overnight. None of the real ones will, but if you commit to sharpening one high-income skill, investing consistently, taking calculated risks, never stopping learning, and being intentional about who you spend time with, I genuinely believe that within 5 to 10 years, you will be in a completely different financial reality than the one you're in today. That's not a promise. I don't know you, I don't know your circumstances, and life doesn't come with guarantees. But I've seen it happen again and again. In people I've mentored. In people who write to me from all over the world. In my own life that it's possible. It's more possible for you right now than you probably think. That I want to close with something personal. A few years ago I went back to the area I grew up in. Drove past the flat where I grew up. Stood outside the school I attended. Walked past the shop where my mum used to buy reduced-price food on a Friday evening to stretch the week's budget. And I felt 2 things simultaneously. Gratitude, for everything my mum sacrificed to raise me and my sister in that environment with the love and stability she gave us despite having almost nothing. And a kind of quiet anger, not at anyone specifically, but at the fact that so many brilliant, ambitious, capable people from backgrounds like mine never get the information they need to change their trajectory. Not because they're not smart enough. Not because they don't work hard enough. But because nobody sat down with them and explained how money actually works. Nobody told them about compound interest when they were 16. Nobody explained what a high-income skill is or why it matters. Nobody said, the circle you grow up in is not the ceiling of your potential. That's why I make these videos. Not for the views. Not for the comments. Because if even one person watching this takes one of these principles and applies it, genuinely applies it, not just nods along and moves on, then something real might change for them. And if something real changes for them, it often changes for their kids too. And their kids' kids. Wealth is generational in both directions. Poverty passes down. But so does financial knowledge. So does the habit of investing. So does the belief that your circumstances don't determine your outcome. Be the person in your family who breaks the cycle. Be the Marcus who didn't let Mr. Grumpy be the last word. So, go sharpen the axe. If you want to go deeper on investing for beginners, there's a video waiting for you after this one. I go through exactly how to open your first investment account, what to buy, and how much to start with. Worth your time. Subscribe if you want more of this. And I'll see you in the next one.